Hello everybody and welcome back to Dollar Tree Dinners and welcome to episode 1 of my latest budget grocery week. Actually, should I start it with the video? I have a $35 budget to see if I can buy a week's worth of groceries at Dollar Tree. I did a similar string of videos last month, but that time I spent $27.50 and this time I'm spending $35. This way I have more wiggle room to incorporate more snacks, as that's what I missed most last time. Plus $35 equals out to about $5 a day, and I still feel like that's a relatively reasonable price to feed a single individual. Now, as is common practice with all of my budget grocery videos, I only shop at one Dollar Tree on one given day, and the only things I can use from home are oil, salt, and pepper. One other thing that I do differently from other budget content creators is I try to keep in mind that not everyone that's on a budget necessarily has hours on end to spend in the kitchen cooking food. And one final note is that I don't like calling these videos a challenge because someone out there only has $35 a week to spend on groceries, and this is geared to help those individuals, so I feel like calling it a challenge sometimes makes a game out of someone's lifestyle. With all that being said, welcome to Budget Grocery Week number 2. I made that video in February of 2023, which means it has been 2 years since I did eating for $35 a week from Dollar Tree. That makes me kind of sad because it was something that I had intended to do more of last year, but I think I just got caught up in so many different things. And sometimes my brain is a little bit chaotic, and so jumping from one thing to the next, and then I lose track of time. And here we are 2 years later, and I'm ready to do an updated version. A lot of the things that I said in that video are still very, very true today. I do not like calling these a challenge. I call it simply Budget Grocery Week because to me, it's just about me existing on a small budget from a small store. And for those of you who are in a position where that is your regular grocery budget, for me to say I'm challenging myself to do this just completely disregards the fact that people live that lifestyle every single day, and they do it because they don't have a choice. And while this is not representative of my current financial situation, I have been in that position in the past, and I would have benefited a lot from videos like this. I also still only use oil, salt, and pepper from my pantry. I budget in the full cost of every other ingredient. I would rather give you a higher price and budget in almost every single ingredient than to do a lower price and use extras from my pantry. Dollar Tree has changed a lot in 2 years, so it's very important to do these videos regularly because their inventory is a revolving door. For example, if you're a fan of these kinds of videos, there's another creator, that Lisa Dawn, and she does these videos as well, and I absolutely adore her. I even watch her videos for some ideas and inspiration myself when I feel a little bit stuck. So I went back to her channel and I went to go watch a video that she posted, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and hers was feeding 2 people for $20 a week from Dollar Tree. I have a little screenshot here of the ingredients that she bought. And I was just reminiscing very fondly on some of the things you used to be able to buy at Dollar Tree that you can't really find anymore. There's not a whole lot in this particular picture, but I'm gonna go over a couple things. The first is eggs. I haven't seen eggs at Dollar Tree in almost 2 years. My original $35 to eat for a week did not include eggs, but it did include things like this little roll of sausage that you can see here. You used to be able to buy those at Dollar Tree. I haven't seen them in a couple of years. Another thing is she did buy fruit. So she has this bag of frozen mixed berries. Those you can still buy at Dollar Tree, but they're not $1.25 anymore. I think they're $3 now. So over 2 years, we've seen a lot of changes at Dollar Tree in regards to inflation, shrinkflation, and the addition of the plus section, which is the $3, $4, and $5 items. And I think a lot of us would agree that we all miss the old Dollar Tree, where everything was $1.25 and they had a pretty decent variety of $1.25 products to choose from. But unfortunately, I don't see Dollar Tree going back to that old structure ever again. I do know, I have no affiliation with Dollar Tree, but I do know that part of the reason that they've incorporated these like plus sections to their store has a lot to do with Dollar Tree's acquisition of the Family Dollar chain and how terrible of a financial decision that was for their company. Again, I don't ever see it going back to the way things used to be, but we have to adapt to what is currently available at Dollar Tree today. The other part about that video that I mentioned is that I did $35 specifically because I included snacks and drinks. I want to just kind of focus on the food, you know, the breakfast, lunches, and dinners. So I did $25. That way you have $10 of what I call like free play that you could use to buy some drinks, snacks, desserts. Those are very often left out of budget videos, and for good reason. They are difficult to afford when you're on a tight budget. But luckily at Dollar Tree, it's really easy to get a couple of drinks, a couple of sweet snacks, a couple of salty snacks, and it'll set you back somewhere between $5 and $10. So I did $25 and I only bought the food, so the breakfast, lunch, and dinner items that I will be using this week. I think the last thing I want to cover is that this is a menu plan for one person. If you're feeding 2 people, you can really easily just double this. If you're feeding 3, triple it, and so forth. What to expect from this series is that it will be a 3-part series. This part is part 1. This is going to cover the introduction, as we're doing now, what I bought at Dollar Tree, along with my receipt to prove to you it was under $25. We're going to cover the first 2 days, so day 1 and day 2, and that will be the end of this video. The second video is going to cover days 3, 4, and 5. And then the third video is like a wrap-up video. It's going to cover days 6 and 7, and then I like to reflect on my choices and talk about what I would have done differently. So that's what to expect from this series. That is all of the disclaimers and bases covered. Now let me show you what I bought from Dollar Tree for $25. All right, so first of all, there's my receipt, and as you can see, my total was $24.50. And this is the haul. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I just want to make sure I grabbed everything that I bought from out of my fridge and freezer. So 20 ingredients at $1.25 or less a piece, and that's how it came out to $24.50. The only ingredient I bought that was less than $1.25 was this can of corn right here. Let's go over everything in the haul. So we'll just start from left to right. I have a bag of steak cut French fries, some whole milk. I have red kidney beans, brown lentils, 2 bags of frozen seasoning blend. I have some breakfast sausage. These are just the Jimmy Dean links. I have pinto beans, a box of pasta, a bag of flour. I've got tamales, so chicken tamales, a can of ham and bean soup, a can of diced tomatoes and green chilies, and a can of corn. We also have a bag of rice, smoked sausage, a shrimp egg roll, and then for some kind of flavor enhancers, I have some Cajun style seasoning, Parmesan cheese, and chicken bouillon cubes. Now, one thing to note is that also in the past 2 years, I have seen a lot of changes in myself. I've learned a lot about cooking. I've learned a lot about grocery shopping, and I'm hoping that I can take the things that I've learned over the past couple years and show you some really great ideas in this series of videos. So I'm taking several of the meals that I have made over the past 2 years and integrating them into a budget grocery week menu. There will still be some degree of experimentation, but for the most part, I have a fairly solid plan of what I'm gonna do with everything that's laid out in front of me. Unlike the last time where I just went to the store, bought a handful of ingredients, I had a plan, but I didn't really quite know what I was gonna do with some of those things. And especially as we got to the end of the week where I made things like vegetable and rice soup and just a really basic baked pasta. It always starts off really strong, and then as we get to the end of the week, it's like, okay, what can I make with what I have left? I think I've come up with a really good plan. Time will tell. I guess we'll know by the end of episode 3. One thing that you guys will see is I did include beans and lentils, which is not something I have often done in past Budget Grocery Week series. I try to limit the use of beans and lentils as much as possible. But again, with the changes that we've seen in Dollar Tree over the past couple of years and how I've learned to cook in the past couple of years, I thought it would be a good opportunity to try to incorporate a few more of those items into our plan. If for nothing, then cheap ways to incorporate more protein and fiber into the menu itself. And also because I've learned that I actually really like those things if they're cooked properly and seasoned properly. For me officially, this is going to start tomorrow with breakfast, but we do have to do a little bit of prep work tonight, particularly in regards to the beans that I purchased. So I'm gonna go ahead and put away my frozen and refrigerated ingredients, and for the time being, we're gonna be focusing on these 2 bags of beans that I bought. So I bought 2 bags of dried beans. I got a bag of pinto beans and a bag of red kidney beans. Now, I do want to mention that pinto beans are the only beans that you can buy at Dollar Tree that are still sold as a full pound. This is 16 ounces. The black beans, the red kidney beans, the Great Northern beans, those are all sold as 12-ounce packages. Same thing with the brown lentils, but I don't really count that as a bean. It is technically a bean. I don't count it as a bean. So when we're on the topic of beans, particularly as it pertains to Dollar Tree, where some items are not as competitively priced as others. For example, they only recently got cans of beans that were $1, and they only recently got cans of vegetables that were 75 cents. Before that, everything was $1.25. And as most people really like to point out, you can buy canned beans and canned vegetables at almost any other grocery store for less than $1. When it comes to this lovely bag of dry beans though, this is a 1-pound bag of beans, and after it has been cooked, it is equivalent to 4 cans of beans from the grocery store. We can say the same about the 12-ounce bag, but that one is equivalent to 3 cans of beans instead of 4. So that means you can spend $1.25 on 1 can of beans, or you can spend $1.25 on a bag of dry beans and get 4 times the same amount of food for your money's worth. It's a little bit different now because again, they do sell $1 beans. But even if you were to buy 4 cans of the $1 beans, that's still $4. It is more economical to buy dry beans than it is canned beans. So the first thing we need to do is sort our beans. And I get a lot of questions about this. We are mostly looking for rocks. Beans are grown in the ground. They're harvested by machines and then they're passed through sorting machines. And sometimes in that process, a small pebble can make its way into your bag of beans. I count maybe 1 or 2 times that I've actually found a rock in my beans, but it's one of those better safe than sorry kind of steps. I feel like it's less common today than it probably was like 10 or 20 years ago, but it's still a good idea to check. I like to do this on a plate just to kind of keep my eyes sharp. It limits the pool of how many beans I'm looking at, and it puts them like on a nice flat surface to where I can really like gauge what I'm looking at again. Now another thing that kind of keeps your eyes sharp are looking for beans that are a little disfigured. So beans that are a darker color or maybe a little shrivelly. It's so that you don't go into autopilot. Let's call it that. Because if you're looking for the darker beans or the shriveled up beans, you're not gonna go on autopilot and accidentally miss a rock. I'm going to grab a bowl, and as I sort through each plate of beans, I will transfer it into that bowl. And then I will pour another batch onto my plate. I'm not taking out any of the broken beans. There's actually a lot of broken beans in this, but I'm not too worried about those. The only thing you really have to remove are rocks. Okay. Also good. And that is that. Also looks really good. I'm finding anything rogue in here. So our pinto beans are good. I pulled out 2 just because they're a little dark and shriveled, but those are good to go. I'm gonna do the same with the red kidney beans. And from the red kidney beans, I took out 3. You can kind of see what I'm talking about when I say like darker, shriveled. This one looks a little brown at the end there. This one was probably okay, but it's a little shriveled. So those are what I look out for. So I pulled out 5 beans in total. We have our pinto beans and our red kidney beans. And now the next step is the overnight soak. Now beans do have quick soak instructions kind of written on the package, so you can use those as an alternative, but I always just do the overnight soak and it works fine for me. You're gonna cover them up with 1 inch of water. Let's say 2 inches of water. Now, I am also going to tell you that one of the reasons that I have found that I never really liked beans was because I realized I wasn't adding enough salt to them. And once I started cooking them with enough salt, then I started to notice that they tasted a lot better. So I like to add about 1 tablespoon of salt into the beans while they soak overnight. There's a lot of misinformation about cooking beans, and one of those is that you shouldn't salt them until after they've been cooked. That's probably one of the reasons. I never really liked beans, but I've started salting them when they soak. It helps them to soften up a lot better. They absorb some of that flavor as they soak, and then I salt them when I cook them as well. There are several benefits to salting the beans as they soak overnight, as well as salting when you cook them, and flavor is a part of that. But that is it for the bean prep. I'm going to cover both of these up with a lid, and they're just gonna chill out on my counter overnight. And so I will see you guys tomorrow officially for day 1. Today is day 1 of eating for $25 a week from Dollar Tree. Yesterday we soaked our beans and those are ready to be cooked. But before we get into cooking our beans, we're gonna go ahead and prep breakfast for the entire week. Within the construct of the $25 budget, I thought it was best to just make 1 breakfast that we'll eat over the course of the entire week. Some of you might not be a fan of that, but $25 is a pretty limited budget to work with, and we're gonna have a lot more variety in our lunches and our dinners this week, so I feel like it's okay to have the same breakfast pretty much the entire week. So here are the ingredients we're gonna be using for our breakfast this week. I have the flour, I have the sausage links, lentils, the diced tomatoes with green chilies, Cajun seasoning, maybe. I think we're gonna add that just for some flavor. We have our seasoning blend and we have our steak cut French fries. A few weeks ago, I used an ingredients roster similar to what's in front of me right now to make some lentil and potato burritos. And they were very good, and I was trying to think of how we could adapt them into breakfast burritos since we can't buy eggs at the dollar store. So I picked up some sausage that we can add to it. And then the diced tomatoes and green chilies is basically gonna serve as a substitute for salsa, because when I went shopping at Dollar Tree, they didn't have any salsa. I would have gotten that would have been preferable, but since they didn't have any, this will work in a pinch as a substitute. So that's basically the plan. We're gonna make some lentil and potato breakfast burritos with sausage and diced tomatoes and green chilies. And the first thing we need to do is make our flour tortillas for our breakfast burritos. And you're gonna start with 1.5 cups of flour. One teaspoon of salt and 1/4 cup of oil. I'm using vegetable oil. You can leave the oil out of this, but the oil makes the tortillas a lot softer, so I do recommend adding it if you have it. And what we're gonna do, as you can see, first thing I did was I took a fork and I kind of incorporated the oil into that flour. Now I'm gonna use my hands and kind of work it in the rest of the way. I'm just kind of using my fingers and kind of working that oil into the flour, similarly to making like a pie crust or biscuits. We're just trying to break it down into smaller pieces. Alternatively, you can just buy flour tortillas at the dollar store, but I'm gonna be using the flour probably for a couple of things this week, and I might be making more than one batch of tortillas. So this is kind of my cost-saving measure to keep this within the $25 budget. And once we've got our flour, oil, and salt mixture prepared, we're gonna add a ½ cup of boiling water. The boiling part is very important to how this recipe comes together and the final texture of our tortillas. I use a fork to mix this in at first because, again, it's pretty hot with it being boiling water. But as you can see, it forms a dough really quickly. And now we can turn that dough out onto our counter. And we can start to work that dough. It's gonna be a little sticky at first. And if you need to add extra flour, you can, but I try not to add flour until I kind of see what the consistency is like. This is a tad bit sticky, but let's knead it for a bit and see if it kind of smooths itself out. I haven't added any flour to this, but just by kind of kneading it by my hands, it's no longer sticking to my hands. And now it's starting to pull away from my counter as well. Beautiful. We're gonna do this again for about 5 minutes. We gotta get that off the counter. So yeah, resist the temptation to add more flour. Even if it's a little on the sticky side, kneading will do a world of wonders for bringing this dough together. A little blade is sometimes really helpful for getting that stuck dough off the counter. So I had set a 5-minute timer so that I could make sure I kneaded my dough for the right amount of time. Now I'm just gonna gently shape it into a dough ball. And I'll place it back in that same bowl that we used to mix the dough. Pop the lid on that, and we're gonna set this aside and let it rest while we prepare the filling for our burritos. So one of the first things I'm gonna be doing is taking these steak cut French fries, and I might not use the whole bag. I think I'm gonna use about half of it. And I'm gonna cut it down into cubes. They're still frozen, so they're not the easiest to cut. But I'm gonna aim for around, let's say 2 cups of cubed potatoes. When I made these burritos before, I used the canned diced potatoes, but I think, I could be wrong, but I think you get more potato with the French fries than you do with the canned potatoes. But with the case of the French fries, you do have to go through and kind of dice them down yourself, but you get twice as much potato for the money as compared to the canned potatoes. And I mentioned Lisa Dawn at the beginning of this video and her $20 meal plan to feed 2 people. Again, that was like 4 or 5 years ago. And the French fries she used in her video, she made something kind of like what I'm making. And she used the same steak cut French fries in her video. And that was back when you could get a whole 2 pounds of these French fries for $1. Now you get a 14-ounce package for $1.25. That is 2 cups of diced potatoes. And I feel like I might as well just go ahead and use the rest of this bag because that's all that's left. It's not really quite enough to save for another meal. So let's just go ahead and use it for our burrito filling. And if we have extra burrito filling, we can always freeze it for later on. So once that whole bag is diced up, that's about how much you get, which I would say that's about almost 3 cups, maybe 2 3/4, because this is a 2-cup measuring cup and it's full to the top. Next is the breakfast sausage. And I got the links because when you buy, Dollar Tree sells 2 kinds of sausages. They sell the links and they sell the patties. And this is where it kind of pays to pay attention. The links comes with 3.9 ounces and the patties comes with 3.4. So for the same price, you get half an ounce more, which is not a lot, but every little bit counts. So for these sausages, we want a little bit of sausage in every bite. So I'm gonna go through and quarter them down and then small dice them. I did set these in my fridge overnight so they have thawed out, so they're really easy to chop. And then the last kind of prep step I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this bag of brown lentils. I'm gonna use about half of it for this meal and I'll save the other half for something else. In a 12-ounce bag, I'm gonna guess that you get about 2 cups of lentils in this bag. Let me double check the servings, that'll give me an idea. 10 servings and a 1/4 cup, so we actually get 2.5 cups of lentils in this. I'll use about 3/4 of a cup today. I'll tell you, one of the reasons why lentils are great for something like this, because you cook 1 part lentils in 3 parts water. So that means 3/4 of a cup of lentils will make almost 3 cups cooked. And just like with the beans, you can kind of just sort through them real quick. Make sure there's nothing in there that's not supposed to be in there. But I'm going to take these over to the sink and rinse them really well. I am going to be cooking the lentils first because those are going to take the longest. I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of oil into my skillet. To that oil, once it's nice and hot, I'm going to add in about half of my bag of frozen seasoning blend. So this is onions, peppers, celery, bell peppers, and parsley. You guys know I use this one a lot from Dollar Tree. I wish I could have gotten some of the basic like frozen pepper and onion stir fry this week, but the store I shopped at didn't have that. So I got 2 bags of seasoning blend and we'll just use that across all of our recipes this week. Then I'm going to go in there with my rinsed brown lentils. And I'm going to season it up with some of our Cajun seasoning. I know that's a little obscure, but it's really the only seasoning we have to work with this week beyond the chicken bouillon, salt, and pepper. And I feel like it's kind of an all-purpose seasoning, much like taco or chili seasoning. It just gives things a really nice kind of smoky kick. As you can see, I'm not really measuring the seasoning, kind of measuring it with my heart here a bit. And I'm adding the seasoning in with the oil component. That way it has a chance to kind of bloom and enhance those chili flavors. Next, I'm going to add in a little over 2 cups of water. Again, we had 3/4 of a cup of lentils, so we need 3 parts water to 1 part lentils. So that's about 2.25 cups. I am also going to add in about half of one of my chicken bouillon cubes. These are the larger cubes, so each cube is supposed to flavor 2 cups of water instead of 1. I'm already adding in the Cajun seasoning. We've got sausage in this one, so I'm gonna just do half of one, and I think that'll be plenty. And we can also go in there with a little bit of our pepper and some salt. The thing about this One of the interesting things about this Cajun seasoning is if you look at it, it's only got 65 milligrams, 3% per serving. So it's actually quite a low salt, seasoning blend. The number one ingredient is dehydrated vegetables, garlic and onion, spices including paprika. Then we have salt and the anti-caking agent. So that's another one of the reasons I like to use that particular seasoning blend. And then I'm going to cover that and simmer it for about 45 minutes. That's a long time, but lentils do need a long time to cook and be tender. After about 45 minutes, we're gonna check our lentils, make sure that they're tender. You can still see that there's some liquid in here, but that's okay. We can turn the heat up, we can let that evaporate off. This kind of tastes like lentil taco meat, if that makes sense. And if I had the budget, I would have grabbed one of those little 75-cent packets of taco seasoning, but it would have put us over the $25. So I just stuck with the Cajun seasoning because that will work in a lot of the things that I'm making this week. See, all that extra water has now evaporated off. You're really at no risk of overcooking your lentils, So that is what we've got for our lentil portion of our burritos. Again, it's a little bit like lentil taco meat or lentil refried beans. I guess you could almost consider it like a hybrid, like it's kind of like beef and beans. So I transferred my lentils into a bowl and set them aside so they can cool slightly. And we're gonna get started on our potatoes and sausage. I am gonna be adding a decent amount of oil, just enough to cover the bottom of my skillet. And I'm gonna add in my cubed French fries, potatoes. And I wanna let these get really nice and brown and crispy, kind of like home fries. In the last few minutes, I'm gonna add in my sausage. I really wanted to add sausage to these to make them feel more like breakfast. And we've already incorporated the veggies into the lentil mixture with the peppers and onions. And I'm also gonna be adding some diced tomatoes to it as well for a bit of freshness. All right. Let's let that sausage get some good color on it as well. So that is our crispy fried potatoes and crispy sausage in our bowl. We're gonna mix that in with our lentil filling. And for a hint of like freshness and a little zest, I'm gonna add a couple spoonfuls of this diced tomatoes and green chilies. About, let's say half the can, or a third of the can. Let's say a third of the can. Just enough to give it a little pop of freshness. And I'm gonna mix that all together, and that is going to be our burrito filling. All right. I know that this is a lot of prep work to make breakfast, but we're only doing this once, and it's gonna be our breakfast for the entire week. So we still have to make our tortillas. At this point, our dough is well rested. I'm gonna shape that into a ball so I can cut it into 8 even pieces. So we're going for 8 breakfast burritos. And then one at a time, we're gonna well flour our surface. Grab one of our dough balls. I like to flatten it out by hand first. Make sure that's coated in that flour. And kind of start with a bit of a round shape. And then we're gonna roll those out really thin. And it's one of those things that it really doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want it to be fairly thin. Sometimes I get these little spots where it kind of folds over on itself or it starts to curl. It's not a big deal because it's going to be wrapped up anyways. And as you roll out your tortillas, you can place them in a hot skillet. Once you start to see some small bubbles kind of forming on the surface, you can flip it to the other side. Let that side start to bubble and should get nice and brown. There we go. That's what you want to go for, these kind of light brown spots. I feel like your first tortilla is always going to be like the least pretty. But once we've got it browned on both sides, we're going to move it over to a towel so it can stay warm while we prep the rest of the batch. I like to roll then cook rather than rolling them all and then cooking them all. I roll one, cook it, roll one, cook it. So we've got a nice stack of beautiful homemade flour tortillas. We're going to start kind of stuffing and rolling those. A little small. I might be a little bigger than others. That's okay. The wooden spoon is not the best tool. You know what I'm going to do though? I'm really light on filling on these. Make them a little smaller so I can freeze half of the filling for later on in the week. I'm doing a mess here. Yeah, this first one that I made is like the driest because my pan wasn't hot enough. So I had to cook longer. And if you have to cook them longer, they're going to end up a little more dry. But we have 8. They're a little on the smaller side. Here's my hand for reference. More like the size of like your little frozen burrito packs. So we're going to do 2 burritos each day for breakfast, which means that we have 4 days of breakfast already prepped and ready to go. And then in 4 days, we will make another 8 burritos. So we have plenty of filling left over. We can go ahead and take the rest of that filling. It's already cooked and ready to go, and we can freeze it for later in the week. So we'll add that to our squirrel fund, except for the 2 that I'm having this morning for breakfast. So we'll pack up the other 6. That was a lot of work just to make breakfast, but at least we only have to do that really once. We will have to remake some tortillas down the road, but the lentils is the most time-consuming part of the whole process. And if I was smart, I would have gone ahead and cooked the lentils at least last night when I was soaking the rest of the beans. But I didn't do that, so breakfast probably took close to like 2 hours total to prep. Again, what I could have done was save myself a little bit of trouble and gone ahead and prepped some of the steps last night so that this morning was a little bit faster. Those are delicious though, and really worth the effort. I was kind of struggling to come up with a breakfast idea for this week that wasn't something like pancakes or oatmeal. And then when I realized that I could make a breakfast adaptation of those lentil and potato burritos, I felt like that was a really good route to take because it's substantial. It's filling, it's got a really good flavor to it. I'm more of a savory breakfast than a sweet breakfast kind of person. So I'm really excited that this is the breakfast for the week because I feel like I would personally get tired of eating something like oatmeal or pancakes every day for 7 days. But a breakfast burrito is something I could eat every day all week and not get sick of it. And if you have other things in your fridge like jalapenos or hot sauce or salsa, you can really change up the flavor a little bit day after day so it doesn't feel like you're eating the same thing all the time. I'm really happy with these though, and I feel like this was a great use of our ingredients and our budget for the week. For the majority of the week, our lunches will be leftovers from our dinners because each of the dinners I'm going to make are going to make around 4 servings a piece. However, on this first day, we haven't cooked any dinner yet, so I have 2 options for lunch. The first is this ham and bean soup, and the second is this shrimp egg roll. That's why I purchased both of these items, because I make a meal out of each of these by pairing them with just cooked rice. I think I'm gonna save the egg roll for the end though, because it's probably one of my favorite Dollar Tree meals, and I think it would be a really great way to kind of celebrate making it to the end of the week on this very limited spend by saving one of my favorite meals for the end. And in the meantime, for lunch today, we're just gonna do this ham and bean soup, but we're gonna serve it over rice to make it more filling, more substantial, and make more of a meal out of a can of soup. So now we have this 2-pound bag of white rice, and one thing that's kind of important to note is knowing how much you get out of something is really helpful when you're putting together meals. I know that a 2-pound bag of rice contains around 5 cups of rice. And if we're doubling that because we're adding 5 cups of water, that means I get 10 servings out of this bag of rice. I have quite the large rice cooker, so I don't like to cook small portions of rice. I like to do at least 2 cups at a time. I'm gonna go ahead and do 3 though. So basically we're gonna be going ahead and cooking half this bag right out the front. We're doing a lot of cooking today, but it's gonna mean that we're doing a lot less cooking throughout the rest of the week. So if we can spend one day kind of prepping a bunch of stuff, then the rest of the week's gonna be super easy. So I'm gonna rinse this rice under cold water in my sink until it runs mostly clear. Usually I have to rinse it about 3 or 4 times before the water's clear. And we're gonna add our 3 cups of water. And I'm just gonna set it in the rice cooker and let it cook on the white rice function. That's gonna take about 30 minutes or so. So I was just about to start warming up my can of ham and bean soup, which I really love on its own. I think it's fantastic. But since we have those pinto beans that I just finished cooking, I was thinking that I could probably bulk this out and get 2 servings out of it by adding some cooked beans into the pot. So that's what I'm gonna do. Let me drain these first. Because I cooked these pinto beans in salted water with chicken bouillon powder, they actually have a really great flavor. That's part of the reason that I cook them this way, is because as somebody who historically has not really enjoyed beans, I have just kind of discovered that I wasn't really cooking them properly, or wasn't seasoning them properly. So once I figured out that the secret really was salt. Plenty and plenty of salt, and while they cook, not after they cook. I've enjoyed beans a lot more since then. So we're working and we're planning ahead so that our week is a little bit easier. I have 6 1-cup containers, and I just cooked 6 cups collectively of rice. I'm gonna give that a little fluff off to the side here. If there's one appliance I would recommend investing in, it is the type of rice cooker that I have, which is a rice cooker slow cooker combo. It's called a multi-cooker. It is fantastic. I love it. For your own purposes, I consider a serving to be about 2 cups of food. So when I'm doing these kinds of budget meals, like obviously we're working within the limitations of the budget, and the budget doesn't allow for unlimited food, so I can't always compensate for various like appetites, jobs. Like if somebody works a blue collar job, they probably have more food needs than somebody who's more sedentary. But I try to keep all of my portions around the 2-cup range. I cooked 3 cups of rice with 3 cups of water, and somehow I ended up with 8 1-cup portions. And one of these is going to be for lunch today, paired with 1 portion of our ham and bean soup with extra beans. I did go ahead and divide that between 2 containers as well. And we can go ahead and serve our lunch. That is lunch day 1. I do love this soup and rice combination. I debated getting one of the condensed soups because Dollar Tree has a pretty wide variety of soups. Ham and bean is my personal favorite, but I will tell you I was considering getting the condensed beef and vegetable soup because my thought process was, well, if it's a condensed soup and you're adding a can of water to it, then it's really double the volume as the ham and bean soup. I'll tell you why I didn't do that. I looked at the nutrition label on the vegetable beef soup, and it said that there were 3 servings in the can, and each serving had 4 grams of protein. But when you looked at the ham and bean soup, there was 1 serving in the can, so it had 15 grams of protein. And I'm not just talking about from a nutrition standpoint, I'm saying if the regular can of soup has more protein than the condensed can of soup for the entire contents of the can, that to me tells me that the regular can of soup has more stuff in it, you know? More meat, more beans, more vegetables. But I think my little compromise here of buying a regular can of soup and just adding more beans to it was really the best of both worlds. We still got 2 servings out of it, and I think it tastes great. So now it is time to cook our beans. Now, I've already gone ahead and cooked my pinto beans just because it's the same process for both. So I went ahead and got those cooked so I can show you what to do with the red kidney beans. So we did soak our kidney beans in salted water, and now we're gonna rinse off the water that they soaked in. Give them a good rinse in the sink. Once our beans are soaked and well rinsed, I'm gonna add them into a large pot, and I'm gonna add enough water to cover up the beans by about 1 inch or 2. Now there's a lot of information saying don't salt your beans until they're cooked, but I've always salted them and they turn out just fine. Go for about 1 to 2 tablespoons of salt. And then I'm going to also add in a chicken bouillon cube. The main reason I got these bouillon cubes was for cooking things like beans and rice to add flavor to them. And once it's boiling, we're gonna hold it at a boil for 10 minutes. So we're not gonna turn the heat down for 10 minutes. All right. After that initial 10-minute boil, then cover it with a lid, lower the heat to low, and we're gonna let that simmer for 45 minutes. I will say I do kind of regret cooking both of these beans in one day just because it's been a lot of cooking today with making the breakfast burritos from scratch and whatnot. But it means that I won't have to cook for the rest of the week for the most part. I mean, I won't have to do any big projects like this. So as you can see, beans are nice and tender. Yes, you can salt beans prior to cooking them. They will soften up just fine and they will taste so much better, because they really absorb the flavor of the broth that you're cooking it in. So what I like to do is, you can see I'm using a slotted spoon, and I'm just divvying the beans up between 3 containers. These are my 2-cup containers. So again, we had 12 ounces of kidney beans, equivalent to 3 cans. That's why I'm doing 3 containers. Then I'll take some of my seasoned cooking liquid and I'll just add some of that to each container. That way the beans don't dry out, they stay really flavorful and moist. Just like canned beans. All right, so we did a lot of prep work today. We still have to cook dinner, but that is a really good head start to the week. So right now, there's probably a few of you that are thinking that this entire week is going to be beans and rice, considering we just made so much of it. But the beans and rice, in my opinion, are just kind of fillers for some other meals. And I try to, as always, incorporate as much variety in the meals as possible. So one thing is that we're kind of leaning pretty heavily into this Cajun seasoning this week, and we're gonna make a few Cajun inspired meals because that's the seasoning that we have to work with. So the first dinner that I planned out is a Cajun Alfredo pasta. So to make our Alfredo style sauce, I'm gonna be using the flour, the milk, the Parmesan cheese, and the Cajun seasoning. We're gonna be adding some hot smoked sausage or any smoked sausage. We're gonna be adding some of our frozen seasoning blend, and of course, we're gonna be serving that sauce over pasta. We have a $25 budget to make 21 meals. So that's around $1 a meal, and that's not a whole lot to work with. So what I figured out works really well, or will work really well for this week, is to make a week of breakfast, which we've already covered. We did the sausage and potato breakfast burritos, and that's gonna be the entire week. That's 7 meals. That leaves us with 14 other meals. If we make 3 dinners that each have 4 servings each, that is another 12 meals. That leaves us with 2 additional meals, which is where the ham and bean soup and the shrimp egg roll came into play. So that's essentially the structure that I'm going for. So let's make some Cajun Alfredo pasta, and we're gonna try to make at least 4 servings of this dinner. Now, as with most things when it comes to making a small amount of money last a long time, we have to stretch things like meat particularly. So I have this smoked sausage. This comes with 2 links. It's not a whole lot, but we are going to But we are trying to make sure we have some meat in every meal. So I'm gonna take 1 of my 2 links of smoked sausage, and I'm gonna cut it into quarters lengthwise, just like we did with the breakfast sausage. And then we're going to dice that. And that will be our meat for our Alfredo pasta. I'm of course using the hot smoked sausage because that is my preference, but they do have a mild version as well. The other smoked sausage link we will simply return back to the fridge and save it for a future meal. So we're not making a true Alfredo pasta, but we're making as close to an Alfredo that we can with the ingredients that we have available to us. Which I'm gonna start with a 1/4 cup of oil in the bottom of a skillet. And first I'm gonna go in there with my frozen seasoning blend, as usual, so we can cook out some of that water. Again, I would have preferred if I could get some of their frozen pepper and onion stir fry, and I think that would have been perfect for this dish in particular, but because they didn't have the pepper and onion stir fry, that's why I got 2 bags of seasoning blend. Once all that water's cooked out, I'm gonna go in with my little bit of smoked sausage. And we're gonna let that caramelize. I'm gonna also use this as an opportunity to add some of my Cajun seasoning, again, because this is a Cajun Alfredo pasta. I'm a little heavy-handed on that because I like things spicy, but if you don't like spicy, then just cut that back. Or you can use garlic and herb seasoning instead. This same brand, Kingsford, has a garlic and herb seasoning that I also really adore. Any of the meals that I'm making this week, you could swap the Cajun for the garlic and herb, and it would be the same price point, and it would just change the flavor a bit. Next, I'm gonna sprinkle in a 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour from our bag. Because we used a 1/4 cup of oil, that is why I'm using a 1/4 cup of flour. Now let's get that all mixed in. We're gonna let that flour cook for a couple of minutes just to get rid of the raw flour taste. And then we're gonna start to add in our milk. We'll start with about half of this, which is about 2 cups. We're gonna see where we get with that. Again, I don't want our pasta to be dry. And speaking of pasta, let me get a pot of water boiling on the back burner. Also gonna go ahead and season this with some pepper and salt. It's not gonna taste like anything if you don't at least add salt to it. Especially since that Cajun seasoning I showed earlier really doesn't have much salt in it at all. This is our sauce. It's starting to simmer. I'm gonna reduce the heat a bit. We're just gonna kind of let this hang out. This is meant to be an Alfredo. So we do need to add some Parmesan cheese to get that really nice salty Alfredo flavor. Let's do about half the jar. And yeah, we're looking a little on the thick side. So let's go in with some more milk, another cup or so. And you know what? Since I really don't have any other plans for this milk, let's just go ahead and finish that off. Make a nice big batch of our sauce. I'm gonna give that a taste. It's good. It's a little on the bland side, so we're gonna add in a little bit more of that Cajun seasoning. We're gonna add in a little bit more salt and pepper. I'm not gonna add any extra Parmesan right now because I think it would be nice to have some Parmesan on the side for topping. I did almost forget though that I had intended to add some of our tomatoes to this sauce as well though. So this is our diced tomatoes and green chilies. We use some of that for our breakfast burritos. We can add some of that into our sauce for our pasta too. A couple of good spoonfuls, and that'll brighten up the sauce as well. Now that our water's boiling, let's go in with our pasta, the whole box. Now one other thing when it comes to pasta, it says to cook for 10 to 12 minutes. I'm not a big al dente person. I like my pasta overcooked. I also feel like that makes pasta more filling. So I go for 14. And I am so hungry, but before we drain our pasta, I'm gonna set aside some of the pasta water as like a just in case I need it to thin out the sauce a bit. Let's grab a couple ladlefuls of that. Nice starchy pasta water. Okay. Add that back into our pot. We're gonna smother it in our creamy Cajun sauce that we made. Make sure we get every last drop out of there. I get a lot of comments about using a spatula. I do use a spatula, you just don't always see it because of editing. But we'll make sure to get every last drop of sauce. And we're gonna toss our pasta in that delicious creamy Cajun sauce. And I would say that looks really great for a Dollar Tree Cajun pasta. I'm gonna grab our containers and we're gonna divide this into 4 servings because that's all we need to get out of this is 4 servings. So these can be quite filling. Here's our 4 servings of Cajun Alfredo pasta. And this might not look like much. This is a dinner plate. If you want to give it a little pop of color, you can sprinkle on a smidge extra Cajun seasoning, a little extra Parmesan cheese, and there we go. That is our dinner. That has been a very long and productive day of cooking, but I'm really happy with everything we've made today. And I think we've got a really good head start on the rest of the week. This is an absolutely huge meal. Definitely dinner worthy. We have 3 other servings of this pasta, so like we're set for tomorrow if we wanted to not cook. So like as it stands right now, tomorrow for breakfast is gonna be my breakfast burritos, but for lunch I have the choice between the rest of the ham and bean soup, or I could have a second serving of this Alfredo pasta. And then if I cook something for dinner, then the next day I'll also have 2 choices for lunch and so forth. So it's really good to cook a few things and have a few things to choose from. That way I'm not kind of forced into eating something. If I'm not really in the mood to eat it, at least I have 2 things to choose from. I love how saucy it is. I like the little pops of like peppers and onions I'm getting in there, the occasional bite of tomato, of course the occasional bite of smoked sausage. But the sauce itself is really, really flavorful. I love the Parmesan cheese and the Cajun seasoning. Cajun chicken, well, this isn't Cajun chicken. Usually I would make Cajun chicken pasta, but the only chicken you can really buy at Dollar Tree is the canned stuff. And within this kind of tight budget, it's hard to justify spending $1.25 of that budget on a tiny little bit of chicken. So that's why I went with this smoked sausage. I'm gonna finish my dinner and I'll see you tomorrow for day 2.